What's up, everyone? Welcome back again to another go at Witch on the Holy Night. I hope everyone's doing alright, because every day I've been playing this game and enjoying it immensely. So if anything else, we're going to continue on from where we last left off, so I hope you all continue to enjoy. Thank you again for all the love and support. Let's do this. Alright, and we are back, everyone. After some manipulation of the mana flow, the power within was directed to accumulate at the Kuunji estate. That is to say, the bounded field existed to monopolize the magical energy within Misaki City. There are 5 sigils in total, with the Kuunji estate located in the center. If all 5 sigils were forcibly removed, Aoko's jurisdiction over this territory would be in title only. Without the power of the land to back them up, they would be forced to fight back against their invaders on equal ground, with only their own innate abilities to protect them. The only reason Alice and the inexperienced Aoko were able to defend this territory so far was because of these 2 fields. The dragnet that notified Aozaki of any threats was also her lifeline. But this time their enemy had somehow slipped through the cracks and was running rampant. This is what the girls had to face up to.
どちらにせよ時間の問題ね。視点がすべて潰されたら、いよいよここでの籠城になるけど。いいの？青子。
ん？別にいいんじゃないの？アリスの言う通り、残りの視点を消されるのは時間の問題なんだし。そりゃ敵のアジトを発見できれば同じだけど、それは絶対必要ってわけでもないでしょ？視点を消されても、私にはあんまり関係ないし。何より、館の守りはあんたがいる限り万全だしね。あっちの方からやってきてくれるなら、それこそ飛んで火にいる、よ。他に心配事なんてないでしょ？
そうね。敵が一人だけなら、その時は鏡の範囲をここに集中させて、戦場にすればいい。私たちにとって、その方が有利だったわ。
Alice touched the mirror on the table with her pale fingers. The surface of the mirror rippled like water. The mirror was another protector of Misaki City, separate from Aozaki's bounded fields. More accurately, it was a ploy that existed only to protect Alice Kuonji rather than Misaki City itself. It generated a thick fog and acted as an invitation to any visitors, drawing them into its board game-like world. Alice referred to it only as the Mirror, but it was known to her friends as the Mirror of Slumber. This was a magecraft that Alice Kuonji wielded. Within the rippling surface of the mirror, an image of a castle began to form and also a lush forest, a field, and a river. Aoko stared at the mirror in silence, before suddenly jumping to her feet off the sofa.
そうと決まれば、あとは行動あるのみね。出かけるわよ、アリス。とにかく現場を見ないことには始まらない。
Alice let out a tired sigh in response to Aoko's determination, then gave the mirror a gentle caress. The sound of the dripping water filled the room. The mirror began to consume the table in a thick fog with a single caress from Alice.
順番に回るのなら、帰るのは朝になるわね。
まあまあ、そう億劫がらないで。ところでアリス、火の五芒星の退去ってこうだっけ？
Aoko traced the shape in the air with her fingers. She mimed the star shape starting from the top, moving down and to the right, and from there to the upper left and so on.
そろそろ壊すこと以外も覚えないとダメよ、青子。
Alice sat up from the sofa, letting out a heavy sigh. They both took their coats from their hangers and left the drawing room.
失礼ね。私だって日々成長してるわよ。この間のおまじないだってちゃんと成功したんだから。
おまじない？
簡単な暗示の呪文。ほら、アリスが教えてくれた軽く弱くうまく早くチクタクチクタク急げや急げってやつ。
それ 本当？
ほんともほんと。後で総十郎に聞いてみなさい。
Alice swallowed her words, clearly displeased. She likely stopped herself in time to realize it was not worth the effort to take issue with it.
けど、留守中、その彼はどうするの？
大丈夫でしょう。アリスの西館と開かずの間に入らなきゃ即死するようなことは。
Aoko responded hastily as she opened the door to the foyer. As soon as she did, just as quickly as Alice's doubts had gotten stuck in her throat, Aoko suddenly froze, unable to speak.
ですって。
Why am I not surprised this was going to happen? For a moment, Aoko wasn't sure who was standing before her. She could only stare at the glinting rays of sunlight creeping into the room as she reeled from the shock. Her mind was completely blank. It was as if she had just woken up from a nap, or a jack-in-the-box had just opened in her face. Sojiro was probably the only person who truly knew how long that dumbfounded silence went on.
あんた、こんなところで何してるのよ、一体。
Aoko had finally found their voice.
何って着替えてるんだけど。
Did he get attacked by a bear or something? Look at his arm. Sojiro's response was matter of fact. He offered no explanation as to why he was changing in the foyer and not the bathroom. Aoko was too shocked to read him the riot act. Sojiro was putting a shirt on after presumably just getting out from the bath. His neck was wrapped in bandages, and he was completely shirtless. His hair was wet, but his skin wasn't glistening from the steam of hot water. He must have washed himself with nothing more than cold water. Though shocked as to why anyone would do such a thing in this cold weather, she let it slide. The source of her silent stupor was simply his body. Until now, she'd only seen him as harmless. Without his clothing to hide him, however, he was more fit than she'd ever imagined. For a rough mountain upbringing where one's body and strength meant survival, perhaps he was even a bit underdeveloped. And on top of that...
それ、傷跡なの？
Aoko asked cautiously. Sojiro followed her gaze. He had something that looked like a burn scar on his arm. It was random in appearance, nothing like Aoko's magic crest with its ordered patterns.
ああ、これか。ずいぶん前に野犬の群れに襲われて噛みつかれたんだ。命があっただけでも幸運だから、傷跡ぐらいはご愛嬌だ。
A long time ago, he must be talking about when he was a child. Though his life was saved, it was apparent that he hadn't been able to receive proper treatment deep in the mountains where he lived. Those scars were proof of that. Considering it had happened so many years ago, it was likely they would never fade. If only for an instant, Aoko thought the wild scars left on his skin suited his lean body perfectly.
確かに、あまり気持ちのいいものじゃないな。自分の部屋で着替えるべきだった。
Sojiro sounded slightly ashamed as he put on his shirt, looking at Aoko standing there in cold silence. The two girls had no response. Sojiro headed for the stairs to go back to his room.
ちょっと待って、宗十郎。
Sojiro stopped and turned around.
なんていうか。
Aoko looked away awkwardly, apparently not knowing why she had stopped him herself.
なんか青崎らしくない。さっきから変だけど、熱でもあるんじゃないのか？あれから満足に寝てないだろ、二人とも。
He was of course referring to the final exams. From Sojiro's perspective, the amount of work Aoko put in seemed strange.
熱なんてないったら。そうじゃなくて、どうしてこんなところで着替えてたのよ、あんたは。
Aoko was doing her best to keep up appearances, but for some reason, Sojiro was hesitant to say too much more.
それは、言いづらいんだが、下着の管理はきちんとした方がいいと思う。どっちだかは知らないけど。
Oh, that's why. Alice, who had been completely silent behind Aoko, couldn't resist responding to that statement. Although she hadn't wanted to get involved, this was something she couldn't ignore.
言っておくけど、それは青子だから。
you just threw her under the bus. Alice's response was quick and to the point.
洗濯の当番は確かに私だったけど。
Aoko seemed like she was just holding back on going critical.
とにかく、もうすぐアルバイトだから着替えてくる。
Sensing that those two were probably about to get into an argument, Sojiro took his chance to leave. And with that, Sojiro briskly left the scene.
アリス。
とりあえず、片付けてくるわ。
Alice calmly walked into the bathroom. A few minutes later, just as the two were about to head out and fulfill their duties as mages, Aoko remembered something she wanted to ask.
そうだ、アリス。傷ってあれのこと？
あれは傷跡じゃないわ。だって、あんなにも誇らしいもの。
Aoko agreed. What had impressed her the most about those scars was how he treated them simply as part of his past, absent of any regret. Aoko wouldn't have gone so far as to say he was proud, but it seemed her instincts had been correct. That and one more thing.
でも一つだけはっきりしたわ。それじゃあ、不覚にも見惚れてたのは私一人じゃなかったってことよね、アリス。
Aoko smiled wryly at Alice, like a child who knew they were doing something they shouldn't with their friend. Alice was trying to ignore her as best she could. She looked away without saying a word. Aoko let out a satisfied snicker and began walking towards the front door.
じゃ、行こうか。まずはあの公園からでいいでしょ。今回の件は、あそこから全てが始まったわけだし。
She was talking about the local park in Misaki. The place where they had run into the enemy puppets and, of course, where their involvement with Sojiro had all begun. Early the next morning, it was 5 o'clock in the morning. Most people were still in their beds sleeping. Although some 24-hour convenience stores had opened last year, Misaki Town was still very much living in the good old days of the early 80s. Even the tofu shop in the shopping district, known for opening earlier than anywhere else, didn't open until 6. But this was the late 80s, during the latter half of Japan's bubble economy. It was a time when metropolitan areas never slept. Those in the countryside, however, remained in the past. The homes were blanketed in silence, the streets were empty of the commuters, and not a single automobile could be heard. The sun was just barely peeking over the horizon. The town would still be asleep for at least an hour longer before it began waking up. It was during this time that someone stepped into the Kunji estate. Sujiro was working the late shift during winter vacation and had just come home. He moved quietly through the drawing room so he wouldn't wake up Aoko and Alice, who were presumably still asleep. The Kurunji estate had a few established rules. One of those rules forbade more Japanese tea. This new rule had only come into effect 3 days prior. It was proposed after Alice saw Sojiro drinking green tea in the kitchen after dinner one night.
Oh?
Looking back on it, the decision had been made rather abruptly. That single gasp of surprise was all Alice said. She grasped her head as if she was battling the most vicious of migraines, called for Aoko, and then made the decision to ban all Japanese teas from this mansion. By some miracle, Aoko managed to negotiate and keep Sojiro's privileges to barley tea during the summer.
だいたい、イギリス産だって初めはグリーンティーが主流だったじゃない。
Aoko had clearly hit a nerve with this argument. Aoko stared at Alice, fairly certain why she was so taken aback by Sojiro's actions.
そこまで嫌がらなくてもな。お茶は何だって美味しいのに。
Sojiro grumbled to himself while sipping his hot green tea. He didn't realize that Alice was upset because he had poured his green tea into a teacup meant for black tea. Okay. In Sojiro's defense, this was the only teacup that Alice had given him permission to use. At any rate, the early morning was his to enjoy. This was his moment to relax with the Japanese tea set he'd smuggled in. He didn't use this time to read books or watch TV. He just drank his tea and gazed fondly at the garden, or rather, the dense woods outside. Sojiro simply sat, relaxed, and let his mind wander. About an hour passed. Just as he was beginning to feel refreshed, he heard sounds coming from the foyer. He knew it was Aoko and Alice talking, so he rushed to hide his teapot, and tea leaves in the kitchen. Hiding the contraband was easy enough considering just how many unused shelves there were in the kitchen. Sojiro was perturbed by how they wasted the potential of such splendid kitchen.
あら、早いのね、宗十郎。
Aoko spoke as she took off her white down jacket. Next to her, Alice suddenly took off her black coat.
いや、今帰ってきたんだ。天城浜の食品工場に深夜のパートで入ることになって、その帰り。
Sojiro stuck his head out from the kitchen and gestured that he was about to put on some water to boil. Alice tilted her head slightly at him. It wasn't that she thought his gesturing was funny or anything like that.
天城浜から
Alice glanced up at the clock in the drawing room and her expression darkened.
どうしたのアリス。
Aoko asked this from her comfortable seat on the sofa.
別に
Alice responded differently before finally sitting down as well.
宗十郎、砂糖は一杯だけだからね。
Aoko yelled her matter-of-course request into the kitchen. Sojiro didn't respond, but it was an affirmative silence. This was the result of 2 entire nights worth of cramming that Alice knew nothing about.
アリスは？
私はミルクだけでいいけど
Alice responded out of obligation.
了解、ミルクティーだね。
For some reason, Sojiro dutifully answered Alice's request.
ま、いいけど、いちいち突っ込んでたらキリがないし。
Doesn't sound like that to me.
それより珍しいじゃない。アリスがティーバッグのお茶飲むなんて。
今日は疲れたからたまには
It seemed she had allowed herself to accept another's kindness, at least for today.
ま、いいか。それより宗十郎。あんた、さっきお菓子のこと言わなかった？
え？別に言ってないぞ、そんなこと。
そう、ならいいんだけど。
The two were conversing over a distance of 4 yards. Alice decided to add her opinion to the conversation.
しずきくんがおかしなことを言わない日はないと思うわ、私。
Her quiet tone was luckily just low enough that Sojiro couldn't hear her from the kitchen.
そりゃそうだけど、今ちょっと変だったでしょ？いや、何が引っかかったのかまではわからないんだけどさ。
そうね。会話自体は普通だったけれど、内容を考えてみると、どこかおかしいわね。
Aoko became gradually more irritated as she failed to grasp what had been odd about the conversation. Just then, Sojiro appeared holding a tray with a teacup for each of them.
何を話してるんだ？単に新しいアルバイトを始めただけだろ。
He put the cups down on the black table without making even the slightest sound. Alice couldn't complain about how proper his job as a waiter had made him. While she didn't say anything out loud, she did nod in his direction to show some gratitude. Aoko, however,
天城浜だっけ？あそこってスタジアムがあるところでしょ？ツアーの会場になるから時々行くけど。
the student council president, a supposed model student, loved rock bands. Aoko was secretly obsessed with a number of bands and used to travel way out of town just to see them perform live when she was in middle school. Of course, this was a world that Sojiro was far from familiar with.
それより、また新しいバイト始めたんだ。そんなに働いてどうする気なのよ、宗十郎は。
ああ、よく聞いてくれたね。本人の名誉のために名前は伏せるけど、誰かさんと誰かさんが俺の少ない収入を無慈悲に奪っていくから働く先を増やしたんだ。
I feel so bad for him. This was as much resistance as Sojiro was able to give. Aoko lifted her teacup to her mouth as if she was completely oblivious to Sojiro's monologue.
それは大変ね。
Alice said this as she set her teacup down quietly. There were some things she just did not understand. Aoko had to hold back her laughter as she looked at Alice and Sojiro.
言った自分が未熟だった。
Sojiro's shoulders fell as he said this. He took a sip of his black tea, still unsure about the taste.
まあ、アルバイトが多いって分かってくれるだけでいいか。そういったわけだから、冬休み中は夜も留守にする。例の薬はアルバイト先で飲むしかないんだけど。
ああ、それなら心配いらないわ。もうあれはやめたから。いちいち作るのも面倒だし、もっとしずきくんに似合うのを見つけてきたの。
Oh god, what does she have planned now? It's that smirk again. Aoko had a huge ominous grin on her face. She put her hand into her jacket pocket and pulled out a little paper bag. It was a small circular object about 20 inches in diameter, wrapped up nicely like a present.
はい、これは入居祝い。これからはそれをつけておくのよ、宗十郎。
It better not be a leash. Sojiro opened the paper bag. Inside was a white belt. Oh god, it is a leash. But it wasn't a belt for putting around your waist to keep your pants up. To put it as clearly as possible, it was a collar.
青子。
Alice's expression darkened at this turn of events, but it wasn't clear whether it was her friend's insidiousness or sympathy for Sojiro that concerned her.
どう？気に入った？
Aoko was clearly a little crazy. At least she wasn't totally serious. It was obvious that it was at least half a prank to just see how Sojiro would react. But Sojiro was solemnly considering the collar he had just been gifted.
意味はつかみかねるけど、こういうものを人からもらうのはこれが初めてだ。
I forgot that he was raised in the mountains, so I don't think he had the standard lifestyle that most people in the city life would be given. He actually sounded like this would be a happy memory for him. Alice narrowed her eyes at what was transpiring.
けど、これは何に使うんだ？
簡単よ。金庫寺と同じで、飼い犬が主人に逆らうと首を絞めるの。あっちは頭につけてたけど、それよりは首のがマシでしょ？
Sojiro grimaced when he finally understood Aoko's mean-spirited gift. He really wanted to ask her what kind of person comes up with such an evil idea.
つまり、秘密をばらしたり逆らったりしたら首が絞まると。やっぱり熱でもあるんじゃないのか、青崎は。
あら、首輪は嫌？せっかく宗十郎に似合いそうなものを見つけたのに。
Aoko still had an evil grin on her face, but Sojiro had a surprising response to this gift that Aoko had clearly gotten as a prank.
それもそうか。毎日毒を飲むよりはマシだし、このベルト自体いいものだし。うん、気に入った。ありがとう、青崎。
He spoke 100% truthfully. Aoko's face contorted in disbelief and she could only mumble if he was serious.
人の行為はどんなものだって嬉しいよ。それに、それが青崎ならなおさらだ。
The best and worst part is that he really means that. And with that, Sojiro put the belt around his neck. He really put the collar on. He placed it over the bandages already there.
こんな感じかな？きついけど、そのうち慣れるだろう。
Despite his words to the contrary, Sojiro tugged at the belt uncomfortably and adjusted it. It was such a perverse scene that even Aoko's face was red as a beet, even though this had been all her idea. Perhaps it was because he gave her such a clear reminder of the scars she had seen the day before.
よし。止め方はこれでいいのか？
ね。
Aoko retreated guiltily as Sojiro came closer for her to check the fit of his new collar.
黙ってちゃわからないのに。いいよ、アリスに聞くから。
Sojiro shifted his gaze from Aoko to Alice. Alice stared intently at Sojiro wearing his new collar and said,
ロックね。青子、趣味に走りすぎよ。
She could not have put it any more bluntly.
いや、やかましい！そんなんじゃない！もういい！とにかくそういうことよ！ これからはその首輪が薬の代わりよ。せいぜい秘密を守ることね。
Alko was oddly emphatic as she spoke before stomping off toward the hallway.
それとこれからお昼まで仮眠を取るけど、くだらないことで起こしたら殺すから。
Alko slammed the door behind her as she left the drawing room. Sojiro stared in amazement.
なんで青崎はいつもいきなり怒るんだろ
He murmured to himself, forgetting that Alice was standing right there in front of him.
しずきくんには悪意が通じないからでしょう。気にする必要はないわ。
う。悪意って今のが
Alice looked up at Sojiro's innocent response. There was a glimmer in her eyes that showed surprise at her current actions.
なんでもないから気にしないで。
With that terse reply, she returned to her usual expression as self. There was no use explaining Aoko's feelings. Aoko bought that collar for the sole purpose of annoying Sojiro and causing mischief. When things didn't turn out how she planned, her conscience got the better of her. Sojiro mistakenly thought that Aoko was angry at him when in reality, she was only angry at herself. Alice didn't bother telling Sojiro all these heartwarming details though. Not because it was too much work, just because she was never one to have meaningless conversation. That was how she had been raised.
しずきくんはこれからどうするの？
Alice suddenly changed the topic. Sojiro thought for a while before replying.
夕方までゆっくりするよ。ここのところ忙しすぎた。せっかくだからテレビも見ていたいし、お昼には青崎を起こさないといけないだろ。
そう。なら静かにしていて。
Alice let out a gentle sigh and rose to her feet. Just keep it quiet. Sojiro would understand exactly what she meant by those words in just a few minutes. The sun shining through the window was bright. It was just about 9 o'clock, about time for the morning television programs to get going. Sojiro was sitting on the sofa staring out the window at the scene outside. The view from the neighboring sunroom showed a courtyard in a state of disrepair. Sojiro could appreciate the outdoors in both its natural wild state and when tamed by human hands.
あれは近いうちに何とかせねばなるまい。
Sojiro muttered to himself, turning another page to his textbook. On the table before him was mathematics textbook and a notebook with Aoko's name on it. Although at first glance he appeared to be a diligent student studying on his day off, he was in truth only doing so as a compromise. He had given up on his main intent of watching the morning television shows. The reason why he gave up was simple. He was being considerate of Alice, who sat in front of him with her nose buried in a book. Instead of holding herself up in her room, she brought out her old dusty books to read. This is what she meant when she said keep it quiet. Sojiro found it difficult to turn on the TV.
とりあえずしばらくテレビは控えよう。
With that decided, Sojiro resigned himself for reviewing some of the practice problems he'd gotten wrong. In the drawing room for some reason. There wasn't any particular purpose in doing it there, but he also had no real reason to study back up in his room. And so, there he was, leisurely highlighting his textbook with Alice there in the same room. To Sojiro, there really was no difference between his room in the attic and the drawing room with Alice. To be fair, he could probably live with a tiger as long as it didn't cause any trouble. That was both Sojiro's biggest strength and his biggest weakness. Before he knew it, the clock was showing 11. He'd spent 2 hours doing his math problems but wasn't even halfway finished. More than that, he was disappointed in himself for lacking the courage to speak up at all.
それに比べて青崎は頑張ってる。
He dropped his mechanical pencil into the notebook and watched it roll away. He knew that Aoko and Alice were busy with something since final exams had ended. He also knew that she had hardly gotten any sleep recently. If she had been able to ignore him during exams, she would probably have had an easier time. Today's nap was probably the first proper sleep Aoko had gotten in days. Alright guys, I'm going to end the video here for today. Thank you all for watching. When we come back, we will continue on and see what happens next.